Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you so much for joining me, Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I am so happy to have as our guest Dr. Jay Budoff. Dr. Budoff is a medical doctor and professor of medicine at David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA and the endowed chair of preventive cardiology at Harbor-UCLA Medical Center. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Budoff.
Well, I'm glad to be on.
Now, let's go back in time just a little bit, because we're going to be talking about natural remedies. This is Herbally Yours. So we want to get to how did you become a doctor in the first place? What made you decide to go that route?
Well, I think it was in high school. I just got infatuated with the idea of being able to kind of, work with people, help people, work on the human body. We had a physiology class where my teacher brought in a cadaver into the classroom in high school, a public high school. And we got to do some dissections and stuff, and I think that really convinced me that I was interested in medicine.
See, that's a wonderful shout out to teachers, though, also, Dr. Budoff, because, that teacher, like some kids there might have gone, ew, and ran away. You were totally inspired for your life's work by that teacher taking that step.
Absolutely, yeah, and I give him credit all the time.
Well, then you did, of course, go to regular conventional medical school and have lots and lots of training. So how is it that we're going to be talking about a natural health intervention today? What got you there?
So, I was doing a lot of research on traditional therapies, on what can slow down heart disease and what we should be using. And one of my colleagues introduced me to Kyolic, an aged garlic product, and he said that this product has been shown in Japan to lower cholesterol and lower blood pressure. Why don't you, look into this therapy? So I reached out to the company and we started a research study to see if this garlic product would slow heart disease.
So it's interesting that you use the word traditional, because that's something that I often like to throw out both for our listeners and our guests. And it sounds to me like you are using the word traditional correctly, because traditional medicine, traditional healing, traditional remedies has to do with things that have been used literally for thousands of years with a great degree of safety and efficacy. And we certainly don't want to throw out modern medicine. I'm a PhD RN myself, but it can be used appropriately, and it can be called things like conventional medicine, mainstream medicine, modern, allopathic, but not really traditional.
Yep. No, I think, and then, the whole additional field of complementary medicine, or however you'd like to refer to putting them together. I think that it's rapidly growing in acceptance among the allopathic, the modern physicians.
Well, anyone who is reading their journals certainly should. Not that I think most physicians in practice in mainstream medicine have time to read journals, because it seems the only thing they can be doing now, unfortunately, is really looking over their shoulder at a patient while they are searching in the corner of the room on a computer for a code, which is very sad.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Now, of course, you're the endowed chair of preventive cardiology. So what does preventive cardiology include?
So preventive cardiology is the field where we try to take people who are at risk of a heart attack or stroke and try to work with them to get them on the right therapies, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's something that they take as a pill, to prevent them from ever having their first event. Because, as you know, the first cardiac event could be death in a third of people, and once they drop dead, it's hard to then do much to improve their
yeah, that's pretty funny. Well, yeah, that's a little late in the game to intervene. You're certainly correct. It's a little comical because, no, we don't want to get there. But even all the suffering on the way, even all the suffering on the way that can be prevented. That's why we have the word prevention. And what I love is that you have been involved, and we're talking here today with Dr. Matthew Budoff. And, one thing, Dr. Budoff, where's the best place for people to look for more information about you or about garlic that we're talking about today after today's show?
Yeah, so the garlic people there's actually hundreds of peer-reviewed publications about the kyolic, the aged garlic extract, and they have them all on their website at kyolic.com. So it's KYOLIC.com. And it really is impressive. They've taken this therapy and really done a lot of really good research in multiple countries. There's studies out of Australia, there's studies out of Europe, there's studies out of the U.S. demonstrating the benefits of this therapy in very well done, double-blinded, placebo-controlled, randomized trials. Very, very, very impressive amount of research that's available to everybody.
And even in terms of the use of the herb garlic, it's interesting, too, when we even look, let's say, at certain European diets, which appear at first, high in fat, which, of course, can be very healthy when we go into good fats versus bad fats, and yet have a much lower incidence of heart disease than we do in the United States.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of paradoxes as we think of them. The French have much lower heart disease. The Asian countries smoke more than we do, but they have less heart disease. So there's a lot of different things that we can learn from looking at these patterns.
So I want to remind you, listeners, that you're listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, and today my guest is Dr. Matthew J. Budoff, medical doctor, professor of medicine at David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. And thank you so much for, getting up early this morning to be our guest, Dr. Budoff. Now, we're talking about garlic, and one of the other things that is certainly linked in terms of health benefits would be something called fish oil. And that's a wide array of things. What is your thought pattern on that as well?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of the omega-3s, the fish oils, and I've done some research with those as well. But I use those in my day-to-day practice, just like I use the kyolic garlic therapy.
You're the perfect person for me to ask, Dr. Budoff. In terms of fish oil, that can vary so much, but now we have something that's actually a pharmaceutical drug. They even have commercials. They say, oh, look, it's very clear instead of yellow. How does that compare to, regular full fish oil, the pharmaceutical drug, which is now sort of an extract of that?
So I'm sorry, as far as which two products?
So there's something that, is widely promoted on television, and it's a clear capsule. I think it's called Vespa or something like that. And it actually is a fish oil derivative.
Sure. Yeah.
And
so Vasipa.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
That's an FDA-approved prescription fish oil. It's very highly purified, and they had a research study that showed that it reverses plaque in the coronary arteries. I actually led that study. So that one is very well validated. It reverses plaque in the coronaries. We did a trial. We called it the Evaporate trial. And then there was a big trial that they did that it showed that it reduces events reduces heart attacks and strokes and death by about 26%. So that's very well validated. That's a prescription, and you need to have high triglycerides to qualify for that. But there's a lot of alternatives. The interesting thing about Vasipa is it's pure EPA. So there's two types of omega-3s. There's EPA and DHA. DHA we think is more as a brain food. EPA is probably better for the heart. And this is pure EPA, and it worked really well to reduce heart disease.
Wow. I definitely asked you the right question. That's exactly the kind of detail I was looking for. Thank you so much. And you were even one of the people involved in that study. And I didn't know that Vasipa is EPA versus DHA. And now in nature, of course, those two things come together when you're just eating, let's say, a food. What would be the difference? Would you just get a higher amount of activity because it's an isolate of just one of those oils?
I think it's also just the amount. You take 4 grams per day as a prescription, and that would be like eating salmon at least twice a day for 2 meals every day. So even an avid fish lover would have a hard time getting that much omega-3 on a daily basis.
Wow, that is fascinating. And are there, let's say, downsides? Like, why shouldn't more people who do have high triglycerides, unfortunately that's a very common issue, request that they get prescription from their doctor for the Vasipa?
Yeah, I mean, I would. I mean, honestly, if you get it through a prescription, it's actually very inexpensive. I think it's like $10 for 3 months because they have these copay cards, so it's cheaper than if you went to a health food store and tried to buy a good product of a purified fish oil. So if you have the condition and it meets the criteria, then I think that it's something to discuss with your doctors. I think if you want to just take a little bit of fish oil to supplement your health and you're otherwise healthy, then I think you need to go and find a nice, a good fish oil that you can find available over the counter and as a dietary supplement, and just make sure it's a good product.
Well, that's great information. The difference is a fish oil that you buy commercially, and you're very right. You can buy something online that's God knows what it is, versus a really high quality from a well-founded company. And one thing I like to tell my clients is when you are going to purchase something, if the company's been in business 40 or 50 years, which many of the supplement companies have been, that's much better than someone who just joined the party yesterday and doesn't have the laboratory capabilities. But let's just compare the difference. What about the fact that if someone does take any fish oil, we won't name a brand, that it's going to have the EPA and DHA. So is that positive or negative because they may compete for uptake?
Yeah, so, there have been a couple studies now with the combination of EPA and DHA, and they failed to lower cardiovascular events when taken together. And they were big studies and they were well done studies, and they showed us that it doesn't work. So I do think that if you're doing it for heart health, you have to take the pure EPA, because as you said, they can compete. There might be DHA may raise the cholesterol a little bit in a different way that's not as good for the heart. But however we think about it, the combination pills are not as good for the heart as pure EPA.
So that is fantastic information, and I really appreciate you sharing that, Dr. Matthew Budoff. And you can find out more about what he's talking about today in terms of garlic at kyolic.com. And how do we find you beyond today's show, Dr. Budoff, if someone wants to look at your research or what you've been up to?
Yeah, we have a website called calciumscan.com. I do a lot of screening for heart disease with these heart scans to look for people who have early disease, and then I can get them on the right therapy again as part of my prevention. So it's called calciumscan.com, all one word.
I do that. I actually have that done, which is really more like a sonogram. Is that what you're talking about? That I really think it should be part of standard of practice because there's no downside to getting the test.
Right. No, I think it's a great test, and it's catching on. It's becoming much more widely available we call it a heart scan as well. Just kind of we call it think of it as like the mammogram of the heart. So, you get your mammogram to make sure you don't have breast cancer. Now you get your heart scan to make sure you don't have heart disease.
But are you talking about the use here of an X-ray or the use of an ultrasound kind of technology, which has no downside?
Yeah, there's two different ways of doing it. There's the ultrasound looks at the neck mostly, and there's also they can look at the heart, and then there's the scan that uses a CAT scanner. So I would talk to your doctor about which one is most appropriate.
Okay.
But but they're definitely both good for you depending on your situation.
Yeah, and it would make so much. We should do just like. That's why you're called preventive cardiology, because you've been deeply researching what can we do ahead of time to even prevent a first, not only heart attack, but any kind of incident. And it's really should be part of standard of practice. That's my big thing. Incorporating many more natural therapies, good diet, things that really make sense, not waiting even until there is an incident, but way beforehand to avoid it in the first place. And there's so much there. It really should be incorporated into, I think, mainstream practice.
Yep, no, I totally agree. And we've been trying to work towards that and educating doctors on this and on some of the supplements that are beneficial for them, because they don't learn about these in traditional medical schools still, or allopathic medical schools still. The modern schools still don't teach as much about these nutritional supplements and diet.
As much, I would say they mostly teach nothing. Not as much.
I'm hoping that's changing over time, but you may be right.
Well, when people like yourself, who are so well respected, so well educated, so well documented, are actually doing known studies, and when you're talking about garlic and you're talking about 4,525 study extracts that can be found in the National Library of Medicine, this is hardly fringe.
Yes, I agree. It is frustrating, but luckily we are seeing some uptake. I can tell you, when I first started presenting my research, I tried to go to these big meetings and they wouldn't accept the abstracts, even though they were well-controlled trials. They were done properly. I'm part of UCLA, but because it was studying garlic, they were not interested in it. Now it's much easier to get these type of things accepted because there is an interest among other physicians, but it's still something we have to work on and work towards.
Right, and when you're writing it up, you can always be sneaky and say Allium sativa, which is the genus species name. And it sounds a little more scientific. Now, what is the difference, and you would certainly know this, between just eating garlic in your diet, which I imagine you think also might be good to some extent, versus using a specific aged garlic?
Yeah, so, I think that the aged garlic has certain advantages that make it preferential for most people. So, for example, garlic, it can be pretty harsh on the stomach. It has a lot of odor to it. It has a lot of toxins, and obviously also affects how you smell. Your significant others are not as happy sometimes when you're on a lot of natural garlic. But it's hard to tolerate, and you'd have to have a lot of it. Just like the fish oil problem, where if you really wanted to avoid fish oil supplements, you'd have to eat a lot of fish. To avoid garlic supplementation, you probably have to have a lot of garlic. And obviously, maybe now that we're wearing masks, it's not as bad, but the smell can become significant if you really are pounding the garlic quite a bit. So I think there are some advantages. The aged garlic is odorless. It's been aged for 90 days, 120 days to get rid of some of the toxins, kind of like what we do making grapes into wine. It changes it a little bit, formulation, and I think it's much better tolerated for the patients.
That's very funny, that reference to, modern day life, that because we're all wearing masks, we don't have to worry about garlic smell. That's fantastic. I love that. It makes our show, appropriate for these times. So that's really interesting. You're not saying not to eat garlic. You're just saying it may not have the same advantages as a specific aged garlic extract that has been tested.
Exactly.
Now, another thing to discuss in terms of garlic, besides its heart health attributes, is the fact that it is really, truly antimicrobial. It is an antibiotic, but of course, it cannot be called an antibiotic because of labeling laws with the FDA. But what about the antimicrobial, antiviral effect of garlic?
Yeah, and obviously, now everyone's interested in how we can protect against bacteria and viruses these days. And it's been used for literally centuries or millennia to help protect against infections. The ancient Greeks, during the ancient Greek Olympics, used to use it as a performance enhancer as well. So, as you talked about with traditional things that have been used for hundreds or thousands of years. Garlic is certainly among them. There are a lot of publications, as you mentioned, in the National Library of Medicine, are revolving around garlic's ability to prevent infection, both for viruses and for bacteria. And it hasn't specifically, to my knowledge, been studied with coronavirus, but it's been studied with a lot of other viruses, and we think that it would have a good antiviral activity. So it is something that my patients are taking in this era to protect them.
Yeah, and especially when we're looking at the effect of something and the possible downside of using it, like the possibility of it being extremely protective versus what's the downside.
Exactly. Yeah, the risk benefit, the upside, downside. Yeah, absolutely. It's very safe. It's well tolerated. Side effect, maybe it'll help your heart, which isn't a bad thing because, heart disease is the number one cause of death in the United States, even with the pandemic going on. Yesterday, more people died of a heart attack than died of coronavirus. So heart disease is still claiming many more people in the United States.
That is interesting, Dr. Budoff, and we all are talking here today with Dr. Matthew Jay Budoff, MD, Professor of Medicine at David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. You just said something very interesting that I think is being lost in the current hoopla. It is horrible how many people are dying that can be linked to COVID. That's certainly true. But I don't think there's any mention about the fact that things like heart disease and what about cancer in that same day have killed even more people. And yet there's no discussion about, lifestyle issues that can change to support that number.
Right. And the bigger problem is I had a patient who stayed home for 30 days after he thought he had a heart attack because he was afraid to come to the hospital, came in, and by the time he came in, all the damage was done. And now he's basically going to be a cardiac cripple because he was afraid to come to the hospital when he had his heart attack. So there's other implications as well. And I think these, when we start talking about shelter in place and stay at home, that there has to be exceptions for people to get to the doctor and make sure that their doctor sees them. The doctors are vaccinated. The doctors have a safe environment. They've been dealing with this for 10 months. Patients have to go in and see their doctors if they have chronic conditions, or else these chronic conditions turn into life-threatening conditions.
Yeah.
And yesterday, 500 more people died of a heart attack than coronavirus, just yesterday. So we talk about losing Americans, that would be the bigger number. That should be the number we talk about. But it's lost among this pandemic.
That's true. I have heard that from many, many physicians that and even within the hospital, that people are reticent to go, and understandably, with the threat of catching the virus. But yet, when we look at what's more dangerous, it's more dangerous to not go than to go, because very often in hospitals here where I live too, they actually have different emergency rooms if somebody's pre-tested or interviewed and thought to have.
Yeah. We have green and red. If you're COVID negative, you go to the green emergency room. If you have COVID, you go to the red emergency room. And we have it all split up, and the patients are segmented immediately. So there's no risk to going to the hospital if you need it. And certainly your doctor's office should be a very safe environment if you just need to get preventive care and have your blood pressure checked, or have your testing done if it's time for your mammogram, or if it's time for your other tests. That you have to get those tests done now. It's a year. If this was over in a couple months and you put things off for 2 months, that would be okay, but we can't put things off for a year. Our health can't wait an extra year before they get a checkup, just like your car can't wait an extra year if you're having problems with your car.
That's true. Yeah, so there's been so many implications of that, and thank you so much for pointing that out. So, to wrap it up, as we get to the end, you're certainly talking about a healthy diet, a healthy lifestyle, and exercise. That's certainly all part of preventive health. And then adding in something like a garlic supplement, and in particular an aged garlic supplement, such as kaolic garlic, or another aged supplement. That one is the one that has been so well studied, with over 4,000 study extracts that can be found in the National Library of Medicine. And you've really shared with us why that would be, a good choice on an ongoing level. And you also talked about fish oil and other things that you can do, like getting extra screenings, such as a calcium scan or a heart scan, that unfortunately is not necessarily offered under health insurance.
That's true. A lot of these are out-of-pocket purchases at this point.
But people can make that determination for themselves and making a good choice and keeping up with, your ongoing health maintenance. So I want to thank you so much for being our guest today, right here on Herbally Yours.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us once again right here on Herbally Yours. And our show is produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi. You can always find me at naturalnurse.com. And I am inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, eat healthy, exercise, and stay healthy.